Today we're going to be making this desk out of some old fence palings. I'm not actually going to hit this one because it's my fence. Let's go find some wood. And for that we can use trusty old Facebook Marketplace. These fence palings are available for free almost constantly around where I live, so finding some was probably the easiest bit of this project. We have to get them sorted out, which means pulling them all apart, taking all the nails out, cutting off the rotten ends, and we're left with some stacks of usable wood. Alright, now I've got all these tidied up, all the bad bits cut off. We're going to chuck them on the table saw and cut them in half so we've got a whole bunch of slats that we can then glue together. Let's get to it. I'm going to be making a butcher block style desktop, and for those of you who don't know what that is, it basically means we stick a bunch of slats together face to face. But these won't glue very well like they are, so I'm going to have to take them to the thicknesser to clean up the wood so that it glues properly, otherwise it will just fall apart. And no one wants to make furniture that self-destructs spontaneously, unless your name's IKEA. After that's done, I've got them all sorted out, and here's where the fun bit begins, because it's basically a big jigsaw puzzle. I'm just playing around with lining up some of the darks and the light wood so I get a pattern that I'm happy with. And then I can just glue it all together and clamp it really tight so that there's no gaps. Alrighty, so we've got one slab all glued up. It looks really cool. I love the way the dark and the light woods work together. I think with varnish, it's gonna really pop. But we need to do another 2 of these for the desk, and then another one for the bench bit up the top, and another one for the drawer. So we've got a bit of work to do. So let's get to gluing up another one of these slabs. This was probably the most enjoyable bit of the build, taking all these flimsy slats, gluing them together and coming out the other side with a nice solid board. But my enjoyment wasn't going to last forever because the next step was pretty painful. I had to plane them all down to the right size with the thicknesser, and this took literally ages, and it was so noisy and so dusty. Safe to say I was more than done with it by the time I'd finished.
I am sick of planing.
We're done, and they look amazing. I love the look of the grain with all different colors of wood. Yeah, it'll look great with some varnish on it, but next we have to trim them up, glue them up, and then we'll have some slabs to put on our desktop. So we've got to get to that, and then we also need to make the rest of the sides. So we'll get there one day. Let's do it, let's get these trimmed up. Before we go any further, I should explain to you the design of this desk, because it's basically going to be a normal desktop, but on either side there's going to be these panels that I can remove and put audio rack gear in the space of if I want to. For that to work, I'm going to have to cut one of these boards into 3 pieces. The 2 side pieces have some extra width added onto them. Then I'm going to create this Tetris looking bit out of the other pieces, although I'm glad I'm not playing Tetris with this because it's kind of heavy. It's heavy. To trim this up, I'm going to use my jigsaw to get the bulk of the material off, and since I don't have a good track saw, I'm going to actually use my router with a flush trim bit to cut the rest off. This basically works by having a bearing that you run along a guide, and the router bit cuts the rest of the material to the exact same size, which is really handy for a job like this. Next I have to cut this 45-degree angle with my router, and this took a little bit of fiddling around since I couldn't just use a normal saw. The other pieces were a lot easier because I could just run them along my table saw. These won't hold together very well unless we have some brackets, so we're going to do that now. We need to make some recesses so the brackets sit nice and flush, and then we can drill out some holes and screw in some threaded inserts so that everything bolts together. This is going to be really handy in the future if I ever have to transport this thing, because not only is it quite large, but it's also really heavy. And I mean like 70 kilos worth of heavy. Now that the desktop's all done, we can move on to the shelf, which is basically the exact same process. We're going to trim up the ends, make some recesses, and then we can bolt our brackets onto the ends. These pieces are kind of useless unless we can stand them up, so we're going to move on to getting the sides together now, which we're going to construct out of these thicker cross braces of the fence. We've got to pull all the nails out, and some of these were just so stuck in there that I had to just chuck the wood out. So we're going to clean them up now with the table saw so we can glue some of them together. Each side is going to feature a cross pattern, which we're going to make now out of some of these longer pieces. And I'm going to use a template that I made out of some MDF to get these clamped up so that each side is exactly the same size. Otherwise this desk is going to end up a bit cattywampus. The next job is cutting up some smaller pieces to fill in the gaps, and we're going to glue them together in sections so we can fit them through the thicknesser. Once they're all cleaned up, I can use my table saw to get the rough shape and then finish them off with the router. Then it's basically just a giant jigsaw puzzle, except this one we're making the pieces, and we're also gluing them together. Only psychos glue jigsaw puzzles together. After they're all clamped up and glued together, I went to sand off some of the last little rough bits and glue squeeze out. And at this point, I realized a big problem. So I couldn't get these flat with the sander. They're just not cooperating. I thought I glued them flat, but they're just not flat enough, and it's going to be really wonky when we try and put the desk next to the side. It's going to be all little gaps everywhere. So we're going to have to use the router and literally just CNC, basically manually CNC this whole thing. And then do the other end. Which is just going to take ages, but there's no other way. So wish me luck. I've got a lot of routing to do. This took hours and hours of going back and forth with the router, and I can't say it was the most enjoyable job. So if any of you out there are aspiring to become a CNC router one day, I don't advise it. Leave that for the robots to do. The other thing about robots is they don't make mistakes, and that's exactly what happened here. I hadn't quite tightened the router bit up enough, and at this point it slipped and gouged out these ugly marks in the side. And I can't say I was very happy with myself for this, but things happen. And we're gonna fix it later in the video. But first, let's get this desk together. We're gonna mark out the size with our template and then trim the pieces with our circular saw. These sides have a bunch of nail holes in one side and some natural cracks and grooves, which look really, really cool. But I kind of don't want a whole bunch of holes in my desktop, so we're going to fill them with epoxy. And I'm convinced these holes are connected to some vast open void because they took so much epoxy to fill up. But in the end, we got there, and it's time to get these pieces flat again. This body file is actually a really good tool to take off the excess material, and then we can use a sander to finish off the rest. These pieces are looking really good, but we need to trim them to the final size, which we're going to do with our router and the template. Once one piece is the right size, we can just put it on top of the other one and flush trim around that. That way we end up with the two sides exactly the same size, which is good because then our desk won't be wobbly. Then just like the desktop, we're going to put some recesses for the brackets to sit in and then screw them on. Now we get to stand this desk on all four legs, which we managed to do without too much trouble.
Now how do I get the desk out from underneath that now? Oh, like a wombat.
Yeah. Whatever he said. Anyway, once we got that out of the way, it's the first time I've actually seen my desk in the spot where it's going to sit in my room, and I was pretty stoked.
Oh ho ho ho! That looks pretty cool.
Let's get to building this support piece. I'm just using MDF for this because you're not really going to see it, and I'm going to paint it anyway. This was pretty simple. It just needed some 45-degree chamfers on the edges, and then we had to cut some other bits of MDF to make the rest of the brace. Then it's just a matter of screwing on some brackets and putting some recesses in the desktop so that it all slides together nicely. The next job is to make these pieces. I don't know what to call them. Bill and Bob? Anyway, Bill and Bob are twins because they come from the same bit of wood, which we're now going to clean up and then cut in half. Not sure if that's how biological twins work. I'm not a biologist. Either way, we've got to get some brackets screwed onto these. And then we're going to put some matching recesses in the underside of the shelf. After that comes the scary bit, because we've got to drill some holes through the desktop we just spent hours making. So we better not stuff that up. And luckily we didn't, so we're all good on that front. Then after we've put some threaded inserts into the bottom of our supports, we can bolt everything together to make sure it fits. For those of you with keen eyesight would notice there's one crucial piece of this desk still missing, the drawer, which we're going to make out of this piece of wood. We just have to trim it to the right length, and then we're going to make a 45-degree cut along the length of it. And this was going to be a little bit dodgy with my tiny table saw.
This could end badly.
Holding this straight and level while cutting it was pretty tricky, but we got there in the end.
No one died! That was so dodgy. But, hey! Look at that!
Then we're going to join the pieces back together again, but this time with a 90-degree angle. And somehow my table saw has a different idea of 45 degrees than most people, because we ended up with this big gap at the back of the drawer. But no biggie, because we can fix it with this little slice of wood. While that was drying, we can make up some sides for the drawer and then glue them onto each end. Then it's bracket time, again, because I don't want to just rely on some threaded inserts to hold this drawer against gravity, because gravity is kind of pretty strong. 9.8 meters per second squared worth of strong if you're looking at Google, whatever that means. Anyway, we're going to put the desk back together again for the I don't know what time to test if the drawer works. And after bolting it on, I was quite happy to find that it worked perfectly. Now, I could just finish the desk here, but you know what's cooler than a desk? A desk with a lighting system. So we're going to order some LEDs from eBay, and once those have come, it's time to get to work fitting them. For the desktop, it's just a case of cutting some grooves with our circular saw. But the sides are a little bit more tricky, so I'm going to have to use my router to get all these little cornery bits. And we also need a spot for the switches to sit, and something else is going to go here too, but that's a secret. The last thing to tackle are these gouges, and for that we're going to cut a design in this piece of wood. Then we can fill it with different colours of epoxy, clean it up and cut it to the right size. Once we've cut a matching hole in our side piece, we can put some glue in with my handy glue brush and then tap the piece in. Once it's dry, we can just give it a light sand and it's all nice and flush. Now it's time for finishing touches, and this desktop is still a little bit splintery, so I'm actually going to add a layer of epoxy on top of it that I can sand back, leaving only the stuff in the cracks. Then we'll hit it with the chamfer bit on a couple of the edges, and it's time for a bunch of sanding to get this thing buttery smooth. Water pop time. Ooh, so pretty. We're doing this water pop to stand up some of the wood grains that got pushed down when we were sanding. And you can actually see the wood becomes a lot rougher once we add the water in. But once it's dry, we can hit it with the 150 grit and the sheen really comes back. Before we put finish on, we have to clean this wood with some mineral spirits.
Ooh, smells nice.
This just gets the last of the dust out of the wood grain. And we can now hit it with some Rubio Monocoat, which is a 2-part finish. Once we wipe the excess off, we're left with a beautiful sheen. But we can get one step better by sanding with some Scotch-Brite and then hitting it again with the finish. This will just add that extra bit of shine. Last thing to do is the wiring. And this was a bit fiddly because I decided I really like warm white LEDs as well as RGBs. So we've got both.
Here we go.
Yeah!
Where's the RGB? Need to test that too. Why is it purple? Oh dear.
The reason it was purple instead of blue was because I put 2 LED strips next to each other, and the blue light was reflecting off the yellow of the warm LED strip, creating purple. I managed to fix this simply by putting a piece of electrical tape between the 2 strips, so that was easy at least.
It's finally time to get the desk in here and get it done. So let's get cracking. Yes.
What a desk this has turned out to be. It's taken hours of work to get to this point, but I'm so happy with the result, and these LEDs just look insane. But there is 1 or 2 things I've kept a secret up until now. You know how we made that hole to put the switches in? Well, while I was there, I put a charging module in as well, which means I can charge my phone by just simply putting it on the desk, which is really cool. And also means my phone is almost never flat. I wish. Anyway, I've wired the first 2 switches so that I can turn on the white LEDs in sections, which is kinda nifty. And the third one runs to some LEDs I put behind the epoxy design, which means you can even see it in the dark. And it may or may not serve another purpose too. Sorry, I had to. Yep, that's right. I put the Spotify code for Never Gonna Give You Up on the side of my desk, so anyone who looks at it is being rickrolled whether they know it or not. Probably my favorite bit, actually. Anyway, guys, if you have enjoyed watching this video, please consider giving it a like and a subscribe, and I will catch you later like an alligator. Cheers, bye.